Hi there. In this episode, we're going to talk about the causes of the Revolutionary War and the run up to the creation of the Declaration of Independence. Now, to start, we need to go back in time, all the way back to the very first American colonies. So the first was Jamestown, but we're going to talk about the second real colony made by the British here in the New World, and that is going to be Massachusetts with the Puritans. They're going to start a tradition called self-government. Um, they signed the Mayflower Compact all the way back in 1620. And what's going to happen is we get used to this idea of taking care of ourselves. What happens is that the British practice a policy called salutary neglect. And what that means is that they pretty much left us to our own devices. They were too far away to really enforce any laws that they could place on the colonies. And as a result, we get used to this idea of taking care of ourselves, making our own laws, and doing what we want. That's all going to change, though, with the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was part of a larger war called the 7 Years' War that had all of Europe fighting against each other for colonies and power. So here in America, it manifests itself as a battle between the English and their American colonies against the French, their colonies in Canada. Plus, they have Native Americans that are siding with the French. And the reason behind that is because the French were a little bit nicer to the Native Americans than the British were. All of them are fighting over what today is the Ohio River Valley. Think Pittsburgh. Yes, there was a war fought over Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The two sides are fighting this war all around the world, but here in America, we call our part the French and Indian War. Now, during this war, Ben Franklin comes up with an idea. He realizes that all these 13 colonies are kind of acting independently, and he thinks it would be a good idea if they joined together, made a confederation in order to be able to defend themselves against the French and the Native Americans that they have as allies. So in 1754, a group of colonial leaders meet in Albany, New York, to discuss this idea. And the plan, though, completely falls apart, and the colonies continue to act like independent little countries. Now, the political cartoon that you see on the screen was created by Ben Franklin for this Albany Plan of Union. His idea was that if he could convince those people that they were in jeopardy of military defeat, that they would join together and work together. So that's why it's the join or die. Now, what's going to happen with this war is that England is going to send over 10,000 troops. When the war ends and the British actually win, they claim Canada, those troops are going to stay. But the British are going to have this huge war debt, and they're going to look to the American colonies to help pay that. So that era of salutary neglect, when the colonists could pretty much do what they wanted to do, when they wanted to do it, ended. And England is going to have troops already stationed in America, and they're going to expect that the colonists are going to pay for that. That's called the Quartering Act that was passed in 1765. The colonists were expected to pay and supply and house the British Army. Now, many American colonists were very unhappy about that. They thought those troops should go home. On top of that, the British are going to start imposing different acts. Acts are basically a tax law. And the British are trying to pay off their war debt. They had spent tons and tons of money fighting the 7 Years' War, specifically the French and Indian War here in the United States, in America. And as a result, they wanted the colonists to pay their fair share. So in 1765, they passed the Stamp Act. What this did was taxed any kind of printed materials. So you had to have a special stamp on your newspaper, on legal documents, on playing cards, on any kind of license. And the money went directly back to England. The colonists did not like this at all. They're very, very angry. And they form a protest meeting called the Stamp Act Congress. And at this Congress, one of the colonial leaders named James Otis comes up with a slogan, a rallying cry. and that's no taxation without representation. What you see in the image is a political cartoon from the day where it's basically saying that this tax is deadly. The stamp tax is going to be deadly to the American colonists. So very, very strike images that the colonists are going to use in order to make their feelings known. Of course, though, the British are going to pass even more acts. In 1767, they passed what are called the Townshend Acts, which are more taxes on all kinds of imported goods, things like paper and tea and glass and paint. And as a response, the colonists are going to boycott these items. Boycott means you refuse to buy. You're not going to use that item anymore because you don't want to pay the tax. Now, these boycotts were led by a group called the Sons of Liberty. And they were led by two men in Boston named Sam Adams and John Hancock. They're going to be very, very vocal about their ideas against the British policies. What you see in this image is Sons of Liberty tarring and feathering a British tax collector. They're underneath what's known as the Liberty Tree. It was a tree that was in downtown Boston, and they would actually fly like red banners in it as a secret code as to when it would be time to meet. But still, those acts continue. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, which basically made it illegal to buy tea from anybody else except the British East India Company. And as a result, the Sons of Liberty protest again. This time, though, they create property damage. They sneak onto ships in Boston Harbor owned by that British East India Company, and they throw the tea, hundreds and hundreds of chests of tea, into the harbor, of course, ruining the tea. It caused millions of dollars in damages, and today, of course, we know this as the Boston Tea Party. Well, the British were not happy with the Boston Tea Party, and they respond by passing what were called the Intolerable Acts. This is what the colonists called them. The British called them the Coercive Acts. And in these acts, they basically shut down Boston, Massachusetts, put it under military rule, and closed the port until the damages were paid for. They made it illegal to try any royal officials in the colonies. They're going to take over the Massachusetts legislature, not allowing them to have self-government anymore, put in a new royal governor. And on top of that, they're going to allow military troops to actually live in people's homes. So they're kind of taking over people's houses if they're not cooperative with the British military. In addition, the British are going to try to round up Sam Adams and John Hancock, those leaders of the Sons of Liberty. And they had been basically hiding out just outside of Boston, and they were basically building a militia, their own little volunteer army. That military was called the Minutemen, because supposedly the cliche was they could be ready in a minute. So when the British go marching out to Lexington and Concord in search of Sam Adams, John Hancock, and all their supplies, those colonists, the Minutemen, are going to fight back. And the poem goes, it was the shot heard round the world. It was the start of the American Revolution. And that's where we're going to end it for this one. Thanks.